Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the Upper Dublin School District Board of School Directors Operations Committee meeting. It's October 26, 2017, 5 minutes past 6, and we are in the barn conference room. We made a change of venue this evening to accommodate one of the members of the administration who has a temporary disability. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. First, are there any announcements or communications?
Just in the spirit of disclosure, I do want to thank the school board, administration, as well as the public for coming over here tonight. It is much easier for me to get over here and be seated. As far as formal announcements, sir, there are none.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have one presentation this evening. It's an architect request for proposal process. And with us this evening, we have Arif Fazil from Dewey Engineering to help us along with that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Shimlansky. I'll stand up here.
It's just actually the top on the
Okay, right there.
No, the yellow, right.
there you go. Excellent.
All right. So what we've been doing is working collaboratively after we got the review committee recommendations and worked through that, and the board has been having a lot of public forums. The next step is really to look at selection of a design firm, an architect, to implement the design phase of the project. One of the things that we're using for this process is to make sure that not only are we just selecting an architect based on previous projects that they've performed, but using this process to get some input, some free input from qualified architects to review and validate some of the previous information that we have put together, our firm, as well as the school district, and through all the various discussions. So what we're doing is going to be sharing with them all of the information compiled and available to date will be provided to the architects. That will be part of the RFP. It will be provided electronically, so they won't have any work to do. When I say electronically, some of the drawings and site surveys will be provided in DWG format. For those of you not familiar, those are formats that allow them to use the information, not just observe, not just see the information. So if you were using, for example, a Word document, it would be an actual Word document, not a PDF, to give you an example, but much more complicated with DWG drawings. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to provide all of that. We're going to use the RFP process, as I said, to have our architects review, validate, and provide, very importantly, provide an alternative option if they feel it's appropriate and not just a slight modification or a twist on what we have, but a real other option. So what we're going to do is use this process to give them all the information, allow them to vet it out, and respond with proposals that give us perhaps another option that we haven't considered, or just validate what we've already provided. We're also obviously going to request their staffing process, their design approach, how they control the project, and obviously previous projects, etc. We've asked specifically for middle school experience, recent middle school experience that we can use to, number one, perhaps perform site visits if necessary, but more importantly also verify that their performance is at the level that we would require for this important project also. What we're also doing is we're including draft contracts in that RFP. So it's a very thorough RFP. This is the process I use because one of the benefits of doing it this way is when you get responses, they're organized, they're easy to compare, they're easy to look at, and when you get a fee proposal too, it's based on a contract that protects your interest, and you're not getting various different fees with everybody offering you all kinds of different options there. That contract is currently under review with the solicitor's office, so we've prepared a draft. It will be reviewed by Justin Donahue, I think, and then comments will be incorporated before it's released, obviously with your permission. What we've decided to do with the RFP is do a two-step process. So as I said, all of the above that I just listed, we're calling that step one of the architect RFP selection process. So we're going to get a select group of firms. They're to be announced when you decide to release them. We're going to select, the board is going to select, the team is going to select a select group of architects. We're going to send it to them. They're going to respond with all of the above. We're going to take that information, review it, evaluate it, somehow come up with a format. We're going to see exactly what we get, and a lot of it's going to depend on what they do with the second bullet in terms of how we review and evaluate those proposals. Because the second bullet is where they're going to be talking specifically about how they think about our project and their skill sets that are going to help us. So that's going to be a very important part of the review. Once we do that, we're going to shortlist. We're going to shortlist hopefully only 2, because the shortlist of 2, we're then going to go to step 2. And step 2 will be for them to then provide their ideas maybe in more concrete format with some concept design, and have an interview with, of course, the board, and I believe the public will be invited to also attend that interview. And then from there, you'll basically be able to evaluate those final 2 and hopefully make a selection. One of the things that I also just want to point out, everybody talks about an architect, and that's what you're picking, right? But today the systems are so complicated and the building systems are so complicated that my philosophy is you're not just selecting an architect, and that's going to be very important as part of the RFP. You're selecting who he's providing for land development and site design. The site design on this is a critical component. Not only just stormwater, we know obviously about the stormwater issues on that site, but beyond that, just traffic flow, utilities, grading, how the site works. So that's going to be an important component of this team member. Architects don't do that. They will hire a site civil engineer. Most architects don't have a structural engineer, so that'll be part of the team. Most architects don't have a mechanical engineer, HVAC. That's one of the biggest issues, obviously, currently there, and is an ongoing issue. So HVAC engineer, electrical engineer to do the lighting systems, the power systems, a plumbing engineer, acoustical engineer, because we'll have an auditorium and perhaps some other spaces that require acoustical analysis. All of those requirements are in this RFP. And so they're required to give us a full team and a full proposal with a full fee that includes all of that. So that's the goal of this RFP process. And then step 2 will be a simple one at that point, which is these people think like us. We like how they're thinking on our behalf. We can work with them for the next however many years it's going to be. Pretty long marriage. And then you'll make your selection. But that process, I think, will give you a good format for doing this. The next slide here is the timeline and the process. Okay, so the timeline is November 13th is your board meeting where you will give some direction. If the direction is given, then the next day this RFP will be ready to go. It will be issued to the select group that is identified. They will be then given an opportunity November 21st. We will be at Sandy Run, and we will allow them to hear. We'll give them some of the information. We'll repeat what we have in a summary format. Dr. Wheeler and Jill, I think, are planning to do an ed spec portion. I will give them some information on the studies that we've already done and information that we have. And then they will also be given a tour. Bob will lead a tour through the facility. And then they'll obviously be given an opportunity to look at whatever else they want to look at. So that'll be November 21st. December 11th is the date we're asking them, so almost a month from November. So they'll work on it, they'll see it. December 11th, we're asking them to respond with that step 1. So they give you the proposals back with the information. And then, so they'll provide the fees, etc. Then January 8th, we'll announce the shortlist. What happens between December and January is we've got our chance to review and obviously get back. But January 8th, we would announce the shortlist of architects and the presentation date. The presentations right now are targeted for January 29th. So that would be for the shortlist to present. So sometime in from December 11th and then January 8th to the 29th, that's when they'll work on, if they haven't done some work already, work on the specific concepts for the public presentation portion, okay? And then from there on, hopefully a decision can be made after January 29th at the February board meeting. A decision can be made, and it will be, at that point, very simple because everything will have been organized and we can then proceed into the design phase, which is long, at least a one-year process as we discussed before. So that's kind of the timeline and the process for the architect RFPs. The documents themselves are pretty substantial in terms of what's going to them, but that's generally what they contain from summary format. So, Mr. Shemaleski, or I'll entertain questions. Or
All right, thank you. Committee, or Mark, you?
Can you explain, or just clarify, in this process or after this process, when is it that we need to make a build versus renovate, a new versus renovate kind of decision?
Okay, so what I'm hoping is will happen is at step one, we'll get information, right?
Yeah.
And the information at that point, as we said, is to review, validate, or provide an alternative option. We're going to then use that to decide, okay, well, these guys are really fantastic, or they just said yes, yes, yes to everything, or whatever it is. And maybe everybody says yes because that is the right answer. I'm not sure. I believe I'm sure, but somebody else can verify that. Okay. Architects to respond. So at that point, once you've got this information, you're going to announce a shortlist, and we're going to also tell them what options we want them to develop further. So at that point, we're going to see if there's merit to revisiting the capital improvement option, to revisiting the renovate and add option, or to revisit the new construction option, or if they have a fourth one. I'm hoping we're going to be able to say, okay, well, we only want to look at this one, or maybe two, but not all four again.
Right.
Because I'm hoping that giving you information in written format that allows us to make that
Right.
decision.
So one possibility is they all come back and say, well, it looks to us like the just renovate option isn't 47 million, it's actually 30 million.
Right.
And that would obviously change the equation.
Good.
But assuming they don't come back and do that, so if they come back and do that, we'll have to rehash some of those conversations. But if they come back with, yeah, this all looks about right to us, then we're making a decision based on the information we already have, but we're making that decision before January 8th.
My understanding is, and the reason we're following this process is because there's still a little bit of trepidation, maybe that's the right word, okay? A little bit of trepidation on what the right option is. And so typically when you issue an RFP, you're issuing it for what you want done, okay? But there's trepidation in exactly what we want done, so I think what we're doing is using this as an advantage to gain free advice during a competitive process where it's very important that they give you good free advice. Otherwise they would possibly not get selected. So I think we're using that strategy. I don't think we're taking advantage of anybody, otherwise I would say that, but I think we're using it to challenge them, to show their skill sets specific to your project, and allow you to make a decision based on that. Instead of just a color brochure on all the good stuff they've done for you, they've done it on the projects.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean much in my opinion. And what the specific team is that's going to work on your project, I think, is more important. All those things I just said. I think this will help that. I'm hoping it doesn't get too confusing, but we've decided to follow this process, so we'll see what happens. So it's a tough question, but you can change.
January 8th.
You can change anytime.
You can change whatever you want, as you guys have already changed things already. So, so we can continue to change, but we're happy to modify. Okay.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Did you comment on how the select architects are chosen or
Right. So
to get
the short list.
No,
the initial
the
list.
ones who get the RFP.
Okay, so that's something that we've been looking at websites. We've been, I know people have been to PSBA.
Right.
I know.
We did talk to her. Yeah.
I know everybody in the world is probably emailing and calling somebody at the district and sending you something.
Oh, yeah, when they saw our signs.
Right, so I'm sure there's a lot of it, but I think the process that the team has decided is to look very closely at recognized architects that are fairly close by that have very good experience with doing large middle school type projects, renovation, addition, and
Right.
reconstruction, okay? Not someone who's done just a small, $10 million project. People that have done $30, $40 million projects.
And there is a list of.
And there is a group. And then, it's also a matter of not making this process another project. Because if you just put it out in the newspaper,
Oh, yeah.
you're going to get 40 submissions.
What's wrong with that?
At least.
Oh, wait, goodness.
Well,
That's how you,
We're going to do community input right after.
So
Your
the
impression is
process-
that you're gonna get people who really aren't qualified to respond.
So it's going to make a lot of extra work, you're going to waste time from a lot of people, and there's a select group, I think, that is very, very qualified. And again, I'll go back to this thing, I think we're going to have the input for the validation. The other thing is, an architect can only do so much. I mean, his job is to really implement your desires and your ultimate goals. I mean, that's really their job. Their job is to transfer what you want into a space allocation. That's really their job. So I don't want to diminish the capabilities of an architect, but once you've seen 5 or 6 of them, I don't know that you're going to see a lot different if you see 40 of them.
Right,
Right.
I think, Joan, when we were talking to somebody, they even said, oh, this is gonna be a select list, right? I think they have an expectation that it won't go
It's your
out
call,
to-
but typically I've done hundreds of these, and if you open it up in the newspaper, you can do that, but then what you're going to do is you just kind of get books, and you can take all these books and put them on the corner here, and then you're going to go back to the same 4 or 5 or 6, and you're going to be working with those kind of shortlisted anyway.
It does seem like there should be minimum criteria for the select architects in that they have done projects similar to
That's what we're
this.
saying.
But I wouldn't necessarily want to get an architect who's only done residential. I mean, but you
No.
could get somebody trying to do that, so.
No,
You know what I
don't.
mean, like that's, at least there is a minimum criteria, what that is, and, we have to discuss.
So I don't know if the other committee members want to comment on that, but I think we've had discussions on that, and it's tough. It's your call.
And that will be discussed on November 13th at the board meeting, the legislative meeting for any decisions.
Yeah, I'll just say my inclination is not to add work. We're looking at the schedule between December 11th and January 8th, which includes the holidays, to try to go through whatever submissions come back. We're not going to do that if there's 40 of them in that time frame, certainly. But we could lengthen the time frame if there's no meaningful value in doing so. Not inclined to do it.
I mean, it's,
But I think we're not quite at that formal decision point yet. Anyway, we have until the legislative meeting to figure that out.
I mean, even just for straight renovations, you do select lists, do you not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people that do school projects, and like you said, there's others that don't do it as much, and some can
Right.
offer to do both.
Right.
Ultimately, it's your decision, because the most important decisions you make in this project are obviously what the project is, what the budget is, and the team that you select. Those are the 3 probably most important decisions. Actually, they're the only decisions you make, because after that, you follow the rules, you follow the guidelines, the approvals. When you go public bid, it's low bidder. So, I think you've been doing a very thorough job analyzing it. I know the team has looked at the RFP in detail. This requirement to review and validate was a function of that discussion. So I think you've been very thorough and diligent thus far. More than 5 or 6 architects, I think, is just not necessary. That's your call.
all right, you know all the school architects essentially in Pennsylvania that's been, or Jersey, that's been doing work in our area, or the greater area, right?
We know a lot of them, and I've mentioned the names of a lot of them, but ultimately, it needs to be yours, because I work with many of them, so.
I know you're working
No.
with someone in Wissahickon right now, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're working with somebody in every school.
Yeah.
No, my point is essentially, this is part of the reason why we hired you to help us go through and say, these are the good architects. These are the architects that are qualified, reasonable, ones that are willing, or up to our standards, and you're helping us through essentially. We don't need to open it up to everyone under the sun, because you're helping us weed out people that
Really.
aren't giving the product, a good product. I mean, right? And that's part of this. That's why we're being able to narrow it down essentially now and not have to narrow it down after we get 50 proposals and say, none of these people are qualified for our kind of project.
A separate question? At what point in the process do we start paying an architect? Is this whole process on their nickel, I guess?
So we had it's a very good question, because depending what happens here, right, with this validation process, when we announce a short list of architects, depending what we want done, okay? First of all, I think when we send this out and the information they get, I mean, the stuff that we've put together that you have already, site plans, all that information. We've got existing building floor plans, so there's a lot of good information. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised by what you get in writing in response. I think they're going to come with game, okay? So I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. So I'm hoping when you do January 8th, that it's just more of an embellishment of something that they've already given you. And at that point, I think there's no reason to pay anybody for that, because it's part of marketing.
Mm-hmm.
But if for some reason we have something, as Mark just said, that is completely different, we want to go into a completely different direction, and I think we'll have to talk about that, because the reality is, if you're not going to pick them, I think at some point, we want to pay somebody for what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So we'll have to talk about that, but the reality is, hopefully, you're not really paying until you survive.
Okay.
But again, because of this nuance we have here, we'll see what happens, right?
Why are we using this time frame? Going from November 14th to having to issue the RFPs and having them come back on December 11th, is this a standard time frame that we use, or?
We just thought it was reasonable. I mean, it's about a month.
Okay, that's all right. Just from the industry's perspective, this is a reasonable period of time that other districts would use to give them a month to prepare these kind of proposals.
Right. I mean, the only work and the fact that we're giving them all this stuff, most places you wouldn't even get that.
Okay.
It'd be like, okay, we want to build a middle school. We're looking to hire an architect. We don't know anything.
Okay, go for it, yeah.
Or, fix up our building, or we're hiring an architect. Tell us what you could do. So you've got a lot of stuff. I think this is more than enough time. Because the hardest part here is that we've added to this is the review, validate, and give us another option, if you have one. And it's not going to take that long. They can do this. And then we've got more time here, and then we've given them this gap too, depending on what we tell them to do. I think that's enough time to come for the January 29th. So we kind of looked at that. But then we're also trying to work with our dates too, right? Our board days.
This timeline keeps us on the schedule that Mark has presented at previous meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is, if we can meet these dates, we can still could, if we chose to, still meet that most aggressive possible timeline.
Yeah.
Good.
All good questions. Thank you. I know it's a big decision.
Yes, thank you, Ruth. I appreciate it. As I see it, this is an aggressive schedule, but we're not slave to it either. If something happens during the course of this time where the board sees that either more study needs to be done, or we're asking more of the architects and we need to move those dates around a bit, that can be done. This is something that's been set up to show an organized process, but at the same time, the district is not slave to these dates if it doesn't make sense to move forward at those particular points in time. But it gives us a good framework for how to proceed.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate it. What I'd like to do now is to open the meeting up to community input to discuss this particular topic. We'll have additional community input after all the action items are presented. So if anyone would like to address the committee at this time,
There we go.
front and center right here. State your name, section of the district in which you live, and rules in effect.
George Washington. So, I didn't come in with a lot of questions, but of course, you know, I have 5 or 6. You referred to the team who's choosing the select group. What did that mean? The full board, the committee of the board? What did that mean? The team that's, or do you want me to do all my questions and you answer after, right? You want me to do all my questions?
It's a small group, but it's up to the committee.
Are we going to adhere to the time then? Because if we're going to respond, that's not fair.
Yeah,
to take.
right.
All right, I'll do all my questions.
Yeah, do all your
So,
questions one.
First one is, who's the team that's choosing the select group? Second point, there's a wide number of numbers between a select group of 4 or 5 and, oh my God, we might get 40 or 50. So let's say if it was me and I was on the select group that was choosing, I might say, hey, I want at least 12 architects, something like that. Just throwing that out there. If you get 40 or 50, if you didn't have a select group and half of them are disqualified, it's pretty darn easy to disqualify people. I've looked at many resumes in the old days when I was on the board, and you'd get people that had 1 year of education experience versus 20. Real easy to get rid of. Like, it's not as time consuming maybe as you're making it out to be. So I think maybe you should open up your minds to more than 4 or 5. That's my view. And that ties into my other question, which is exactly how many. Is that right? Because you threw that out there. Is that all you want? You only want 4 or 5? Like the team is going to pick? I would want more. That's me personally. Arif, you mentioned close by, experience, qualified, have done similar projects. Agree with most of that? I actually don't agree with close by, because I don't know what you mean by close by. I don't know if you mean like Lansdale's too far, Lancaster's too far. Every time I look at school construction stuff, just in my advanced reading, boy, they seem to be building them way less expensive. The Catholic schools, maybe that's a slightly different thing. Bethlehem, PA, Allentown, PA, York, PA, where my 91-year-old mother-in-law happens to live, Lancaster. Would we not want to have some input from those architects just because they're not close? Because people work all over these days. So I would say don't be too close-minded. If they're not right in Montgomery County, we're not going to look at them. We might be missing out on something good there. And I think this might be my last one. Do you know all the school architects in Pennsylvania? Sarah often thinks you do. I'm curious. Give me a number. Approximately how many school architects who work in Pennsylvania do you know? Just give me a number. I'm curious. I'd like to know answers to that. Because I don't think it's possible that you know all the school architects in Pennsylvania. Any more than Brendan knows every single business manager. No, okay, I'll wait for your answer.
Thank you.
I'll wait for your answer. Wait to hear the answers back.
In the information, Nutella Ambler. In the information you're setting them, are you setting them the 2014 May list that's been revised in June of 2017 of all the things that are listed on there with their priority order? Also, is the RFP, since it appears from just how you're talking that it's already been made up, I'm wondering if that is public information, because I continue to argue that you can certainly phrase any question in order to get the answer you want. So I'm curious what that looks like and if that's going to be public. And again, the same question that struck me is the architect selection. Who decides and how they're picked? And this timeline, I feel with Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, 2 weeks off vacation, New Year's Eve, it feels for $30 million to $70 million of money we don't actually have, seems a touch rushed to me, totally and completely, especially if you're going to really look at all these qualifications of these people. And I think that really it's important. we know mistakes that were happening before, and we need to learn from them. I mean, we've seen some of the other buildings we've built in the school district, and we've made mistakes that we know about now. And so I think a really hard look at these things, it takes time. I mean, I would want more time to look at them, because you don't want to make the wrong decision, and you don't want to just say, oh, well, this person says it's okay, so that's good because I trust them. And I just come with a natural distrust, and I would want to research things myself if it were me. It just feels totally rushed on such a big project and such a big decision. And I'm still waiting and losing some patience about the long-term plan. It's not even here today. The 5-year plan's not even here today. It's beyond me. That was the crux of this recommendation, was we needed to have a long-term plan, because we all know there's 50 million plus still to be done on these elementary schools. And I don't know why that's not here. And also, still, the recommendation is not on the webpage as of this morning. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amy Francis, Maple Glen. Just curious, you had talked a bit about the hiring of various engineers, and I don't know how it's going in the RFP, but one thing that's been coming up a lot in new buildings around this area is potential for varied energy sources and power sources. And are we looking at solar, wind, et cetera? Because if this is going to be, as we keep talking about, a really long-term, probably done investment, I was just curious how that was going to be addressed.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll close community input and see if we can get some of the questions answered.
Well, I can't answer, well, I can't answer completely, but as to how far we're going for architects, my understanding would be that we would be going, to places like Bethlehem and Allentown. We did for the high school. Gilbert is located, I think, in Lancaster. Yeah, and Dewey Engineering is located in Bethlehem. So those places are definitely places I would consider looking for, and we've done it in the past. I mean, I don't know that we'd go to, I don't know, maybe we would find somebody from New Jersey, but I don't know that we'd go to other states, but certainly other parts of Pennsylvania doesn't seem too far-fetched.
So I think the distance one you're right on, we're not looking at within 30 minutes, so we're an hour and a half. What I meant was, what I meant, someone who can reach you within a day and not have to fly out. To come here, to spend
Yeah, you
the
don't want
night
the additional
for meetings.
expenses
There's
from
going to be a
New
lot
York.
of meetings, night
Yeah.
meetings, whatever. And plus, usually also what happens with that, as she mentioned, the team, the additional people, then you're also bringing all the consultants and all from a whole different, area, and then you've got all of those things to contend with also. So
It's
we
probably
weren't-
mostly southeastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I don't think we're saying not to limit it in income account.
Right.
But ultimately, it's your choice on who you decide to pick, and but so that's that. The only other one I'll answer is, I don't claim to know all architects in Pennsylvania. Okay, so I think, in fairness to me, but I do want to thank you for complimenting Bethlehem, because I've been the engineer for Bethlehem since 1987, and we've done every facility in Bethlehem. So if you think those are well done and very cost effectively done, I am the master of creating that.
Now I'm going to look up every one of those,
Please do.
Thank you.
And I would invite you to come down too. So I want to thank you for that compliment, but I would not ever say I would know every architect in Pennsylvania. I think that was just a statement. I don't think it should be taken out of context. So I apologize if that's how you read it.
You don't need to apologize. You're not the one that made the statement.
But anyway, I compliment her, thank her for thinking so highly of me, but I think it was just said in a general statement. So thank you. Okay.
So how many architects? I mean, you had mentioned 4 or 5. But
That's what. Okay. So does somebody want to answer who the team is, or the team is?
Yeah, I mean, so far it's been the same internal team that has been working on this project for a long time.
Almost a year.
Get used to it.
Well, I mean, Joe is here now. Yeah,
But he was on the team.
don't look so bad.
Just to be here for that decision, but that's right, it's right after that, unfortunately. He looks so happy about it, too.
Joe becomes a writer.
But, I mean, we don't, the internal team, the board and administration aren't, we don't build a lot of buildings, we build a lot of architects. So, we're.
Some of us do.
Brenda has.
Yeah, Brenda has. Some have.
Bob has.
So,
Bob
yeah,
has.
we're reaching out to other people who we know and talking to people. And my sense is we're looking at the big players. We're looking at the people who have done high-quality middle schools, who can do renovation or new buildings or something in between, who understand, the complexities of a difficult site and all those kinds of things. So, in terms of a number, I don't know. Based on conversations and names that get thrown around, it doesn't feel like there are 12. But like they're not there yet. I don't know for sure.
But maybe there's 7 or 8, and
Yeah.
that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
But,
Is the team the whole board?
No.
No.
No, it's there's an internal team that we've been calling the SRMS organization team. That's this team that's sort of putting together all the information that got fed to the project review committee, and that includes Brenda, Bob, me, Joe, Arif, Art, Jill, Deb. I think that's it. Yeah.
With, did you say Reeve?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
sorry.
and Arif guiding us through the whole thing.
Right.
She asked, is the RFP public information? I don't know what the normal process of the RFPs are.
I think once we
It
release
will,
it,
once
Yeah.
it's finished.
once it's released, I think it's, because any architect would give it to whoever.
It's currently not a record.
It will become part of the board's record.
Right.
Once
Okay.
it's addressed in a public meeting.
Right. Okay.
I'd say as far as the comment about the timeline is a bit rushed. What I found over the course of all these years on the school board is that some of the best decisions are made in a compressed time frame, because if you stretch it out too long, then other events get in the middle, and so you don't if you're interviewing for a superintendent, say, if you stretch that out over a number of weeks, those interviews, you're not going to be able to make a fair comparison between candidates. And I think that's pretty much true when we interviewed architects for the high school project. It was a very compressed period of time and pretty intense. But through that process, you get a real sense of at that point in time, how all the different architects are performing. If you stretch it out too far, then other things get in the way of that perspective. So I think as far as that's concerned, it's good. And the other thing is when it is somewhat compressed, people have a sense of urgency about it. They don't get other things in the middle of all of that too. So I think you get better quality work and better quality decision making. But at the same time, if at some point in time the board and the administration and even the community felt that there was a sense that we weren't ready, then you can always slide the schedule until you are ready. But I think to build a process that's a little bit compressed so that people perform better and make better decisions is a good way to go. And that's just been my perspective through these years of being on the board and in all kinds of different settings making decisions.
The only other one that the RFP for energy sources, systems, that question, I think that was the only one that hasn't been answered. Basically, at this point, it's a little bit too early, but what I did emphasize to you, and I think you picked up on that, was you're not just hiring an architect, you're hiring a team. And so we're going to look at the qualifications of all of the team members, because certainly the mechanical, electrical engineers would be focused on some of the things you said, but you also have to have the architect who's willing to be a little more open and be more state-of-the-art in some of these things. I say this all the time. The key to hiring this team is a team that's going to put together the most efficient, durable, maintainable facility for you. Okay? Architects have never been fired that I know of for not designing a space correctly in terms of a classroom space. But they get fired for roofs that leak, for masonry walls that fail, for HVAC systems that don't function. And believe it or not, they don't do those components. They're all their consultants and specialty team members that do it. So it's the stitch guy, that didn't do the stitches right that caused the infection, or, it's this guy, you know what I mean? So I think you're right on target with that, but I think that's for another step.
Yeah, so is that really, a design phase question, but the design process is affected by the team you select?
Correct.
Yeah.
We have to look at and get our right team that's going to work with us, that's going to be creative, that's going to look for opportunities. But also just want to tell you the whole solar and all of this stuff, without a grant, you're going to pay a lot of money. It doesn't pay back without a grant. So we have to look for grant opportunities. We have to look for those as strategically as we can. And when we get grants, they pay for themselves. Because we've done a lot of solar projects, but without a grant, they don't pay for themselves. Now, the tweaks of the systems that we put in, we have to look at that. Are we doing high-efficiency boilers? What are we doing with the energy, the utility source? Are we using natural gas? What are we doing there? Those are all things that will come into design, like you said. We need the team ready to execute. But so it's a good point, but I think we're not there yet. Okay.
I do think, we have learned from previous projects. I mean, I can think just on the high school one, well, we now have Dewey as project manager at the beginning. We didn't have that on the high school project, and that led to some difficulties that we ended up. But we have learned, I mean, there's a lot of things that I could even think of off the top of my head, but it's not like we didn't pick up any, and
Yeah, I've said several times that getting everybody involved early was one of
is
the less
that,
important things.
it
Yeah.
was absolutely without a doubt, yeah. Do you
Oh, yeah. Right, the long-term plan. Ginny asked about the long-term plan. So, yeah, it's not here tonight, but it's still under development. It's just not ready for a board discussion. We're still figuring out what that is going to look like and how we represent future work of the elementary school, big work of the elementary schools outside of 5 years.
But we are discussing
But-
the 5 years.
Yeah, but we are discussing 5 years.
5 years tonight and possible changes already, so.
Yeah, but the longer-term plan is still a work in progress. And I don't see any reason why these two things can't proceed in parallel. We're only getting to the point of, which type of project are we going to do still. We're not making a decision about what we're going to do or even exactly when we're going to do it. So I see no reason why we have to do one before the other.
I mean, I think the long-term planning is something that's good, but I think the 5 years is the more realistic operational thing that we'll do.
That's considered usually to be the
Right.
long-term.
Yeah, because I did a little looking around
Yes.
at the districts, and many of the districts are peer districts in Montgomery County. They have nothing posted. So Wissahickons the only one that has anything that goes beyond 10 years. The only other districts that have anything posted as to capital plans are Cheltenham, Lower Merion, and Springfield in Montgomery County, and they all have 5-year plans posted. That's it, nothing beyond that. So my impression is that although that doesn't mean that that's the only thing to do, I do think that's the more realistic working how is the 5-year plan, and then having it go longer is okay, is good. It's good to have that out there and to work on it, but I don't think it should hold up this project, waiting for 10, 15, 20. Like I said, Wissahickons says up to 10 years and beyond. That's what theirs says. I don't know what 10 years and beyond means.
Yeah, I mean,
Could mean 25 years.
what I think we need in a long-term plan, and I've said this to Bob and Brenda and others, is we need a document that acknowledges that we do have these
Right.
needs that the elementary schools will need, whether it's renovation or other significant attention at some point, and we should be acknowledging that and planning for it and have it in our
Right.
view. We're still figuring out how to represent that in a document. There aren't a lot of templates to go by elsewhere in the area. So,
Right.
but I do want to see that, and I think we need to be thinking with a vision toward the future that we can resolve that.
Right, any other comments from board or administration while Aretha's still here?
Mrs. Brister brought up, said something about costs being different from across the Commonwealth. And you particularly addressed, I believe it was private parochial school. They're not public entities. We have to follow prevailing wages, as I think you're familiar with. And that adds oftentimes 25 to 30% on top of everything. And even across the Commonwealth, prevailing wage is not the same amount of money. It depends upon location. So the Lehigh Valley may very well, in fact, it is less expensive than southeastern Pennsylvania. And, Harrisburg is a different prevailing wage. So all of those two items really have, actually it's really only one item, prevailing wage, with sub-points under it is what contributes to the cost.
And when we looked at your budgets, we did factor that in.
Of course.
And then, for example, just to use a real example, electrical rates in Bethlehem are $55 an hour, whereas in Montgomery County at $85. So it's not $5 more. So when you start doing a lot of electrical work, you see how the gap starts to increase. And that's a requirement for the minimum wage. So what happens in this area is the better people are making more than the minimum wage. So those are the factors you have to, but we feel still very comfortable with the budgets we put together.
Speaking of the budgets, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge that I've made a mistake. I think several of us have made a mistake when we were talking about the numbers that we put together so far. The planetarium and wrestling room actually are in the 70 million number for a new building. The space for it are in there. But we've been saying it isn't, and that was incorrect. So I apologize. For
Just
that.
space?
Well, everything is based on space right now. Everything, the whole thing as laid out is just square footage. So the square footage for those rooms are in there, and the cost per square foot that includes it. So they're just approximations based on square footage and dollars per square foot. That's all we have so far. But I at least have been saying that. Well, I haven't said if we decide to build a new building, that's when we'll have a discussion about the planetarium.
You said that a lot.
I know, I have said that a lot.
Like a lot.
Yeah. And we still have to have that conversation because planetariums and wrestling rooms are things that are not in most middle schools, and therefore they just deserve a conversation. But it turns out that the numbers that we have so far do include space for those things.
In the RFP.
In the RFP. Well, not the RFP, in the spreadsheet.
How
Does it cost to put in the planetarium in the space?
In dollars per square foot?
Like 2 million, 3 million?
Like $1 million-ish.
How are those handled in the RFP? Are
For
they
that means
included or
square feet for,
Wait, we're having-
for a planetarium, yeah.
He's trying to
Sorry, I'm sorry, Ash.
How are those spaces handled in the RFP?
So basically, the RFP right now, in the ed specs, we have a list of all of the spaces, which you've all seen. That's the information along the spreadsheet. So it's basically listed as a space, and this listed at 3,500 square feet.
At this point, it is included.
Our space is 3,500 square feet, which is more than enough to cover.
Now, what we have currently in the RFP is to say to them to look at an alternate, but we have to still discuss that. An alternate either.
Is there something where you have alternates that you add alternate or subtract alternate? Is there a difference?
There's really not that much difference. It depends how you want to. So let's put it this way. I prefer when you're talking about a space like that, especially for a project like this where you're going to do an Act 34 hearing, it's going to be required. You have to measure each space and compare it against all of that. So we still got to go through that exercise, whether or not plan comes alive or not. We still have to go through that. So when it comes to spaces, my philosophy is that you include them and then you take them out as a subtract. That way when you're showing the information to everybody, it includes it. And if you decide to subtract it later on, then you show everybody that's the number and you subtract it out, but you've done all the math with it in. Okay?
I was hoping that was the
For spaces. Then there's certain things you might want to do deduct alternates for when we talk about materials or...
That's the big right?
That's down.
All that.
Okay.
So, and then add alternate might be something that you already pretty much know it would be over budget, but if you were surprised and the bids came in a lot lower, you might take one of those out.
Let's something to do with athletic fields.
Right. which is basically what happened with the high school. I think it was an ad was for turf for Cardinal Stadium, but we couldn't do that because we were on budget for what we had. So that ad alternate was one we didn't take, as opposed to the Black Box Theater was a deduct. If we were over budget, that would have been the first thing we would have pulled out. Because we were on budget, that was kept in. So
We just came up with the system, just confused people.
all right, anything else before we let Arif go? All right, thank you very much, Arif. I appreciate you stopping by for
Thank
us.
you for letting us know.
All right, that brings us back to our agenda, and I think now we're on number 5 minutes, agenda minutes.
The September 14th, 2017 minutes are available, and so if you have any comments, please make them, and they will be before the full board on November the 13th for approval.
So we'll move that along to the legislative meeting. Next is facility reports. The first is bid proposals for renovations of the existing outbuilding. Bob?
Yes, we had GKO Architects draw up draft bid documents to replace the roof, but also included in that we had their structural engineer come in because we didn't want to do a roof. We didn't feel the building would be able to hold it, so there were some additionals, some bracing that they had put into the job. So the complete job would be replacing the roof in its entirety, including new trusses, some foundation work that was crushed down, and also some repairs, masonry repairs. Some of the lintels, actually all the lintels are in terrible condition. Need to be replaced over the windows, door openings, and some bracing for some of the CMU walls. The pricing came back for Walter Bruker is $107,800. They were the lowest cost. Bruker has done work for us recently. They completed the Thomas Fitzgerald renovations, the main entrance, the office relocations, the bathroom work that they completed there with the contractor. And they also put in for a bid alternate to concrete, put a concrete slab in. And we were just going with crushed stone since we were just parking equipment in there at the time. As we're looking for this to be a cold storage type facility, equipment that's not being used, seasonal equipment, that would be stored in there to free up other space where we have an interior now where we need the dryer storage. And the bid alternate was $7,600 to install concrete flooring instead of just crushed stone.
Okay. Couple of things. Is there, first of all, what's the purpose of this outbuilding?
We need storage space.
Just for equipment?
Equipment, we have a lot of equipment that sits outside. If you drive around, you see a lot of our equipment sitting out in the fields, alongside the fields. Aerators, seeders, some of our other turf equipment is taking up some valuable space inside buildings. Or at the high school, we have some equipment stored inside the pump room. We have buildings on this property that are right now filled with seasonal equipment that we could really use as space for our maintenance staff as well.
So there would be no future thought of putting something else other than that type of equipment in this building?
That's correct. This would be, you notice a three-sided building and only need gate entrances. If we were to go through an enclosure of the building, heated, that would be stepping up to a completely different renovation requirements. We could start to call in for us, such as plumbing, sewer, sprinkler systems, access with driveways. So this type of renovation allows us to keep the building in a condition that it's used for the storage.
Okay. And the crushed stone versus concrete, if it was a closed building, you might consider concrete because, just the moisture in the building might degrade the building over time. But being open, it's not going to have that issue. So is there any real reason why we would want to go with concrete?
Concrete would be an easier surface to move equipment around on. If we wanted to work on equipment in there, it would be much easier working on the concrete surface than it would be crushed stone.
Okay, so is that...
It'd be the better form for us.
Do you have a recommendation?
You recommend?
Yes, for the price, I would recommend going with the concrete floor.
Can you remind us what the original estimate for this project?
Originally, we were looking into $75,000 range, talking to people, but when we started, that didn't include painting, that also did not include, we're looking just to save the building at that time. That didn't include bringing in crushed stone, and also the lintels. The lintels and bracing were not included in that.
Aluminum fascia.
They put aluminum fascia on, yes, for some of the boards to get us a better product, less maintenance in the future going forward on it. So there's more that was added because we brought the structural engineering, because we didn't want to build a board and find out once we put the roof off the building, it's going to fall down. And have to do this work just to pay the roofer. So we wanted to make sure that this was feasible to repair this building. And most of the items were added in based on the recommendations of the architect and the structural engineer.
Okay, looking at concrete again, if you have concrete, then it's going to facilitate easier and more efficient repairs inside that building as opposed to crushed stone.
Yes, we're always looking for a place to work on our equipment. If we have the crushed stone, you have to worry about if you spill any fluids, now it's going into the ground, or you can clean up in the concrete, or just dropping simple parts if it lands in the crushed stone.
There's a better chance, better chance of keeping your equipment in better repair if you have concrete than
And
crushed
definitely
stone.
better for the people who are working on equipment, trying to kneel or lay on crushed stone.
Okay, so it sounds like the 7,600 is well spent.
Yes.
Okay.
Is this building, can you remind me, tied to, is it a prerequisite for the other building you're going to move staff into? Do we need to do this to do
Yes,
this?
we would need, yes.
Good memory.
We would need to free up additional space on this property if we were to move staff in here. To keep the maintenance staff all together in one space, we would need this additional storage area.
So I'm fine with the concrete floor.
Okay. All right. So we'll move that forward for legislative? Okay, very good. Thank you, Bob. All right, and then, let's see, what else we have? D. Discussion of the 5-year capital plan and potential work for summers of 2018, 19, and 20. Review proposals for professional services related to capital projects. The first one is discuss the progress of Maple Glen air conditioning upgrades.
Yes, as we said in previous meetings, we contracted with DJ Bergerelli to provide engineering. Originally started out as we definitely needed cooling tower replacement. As we dug into this project, they brought that to our attention. This might not be the best use of our money replacing the cooling tower because you're putting a brand new cooling tower on a piece of equipment that's rather old, with refrigerants that are available still, but at an extremely high price. It might be time to actually look at replacing the chiller as well. As part of that, since it is aging, it was 1999 it was installed. This also gives us the opportunity, as part of this, to go in and review the rest of the school. What would it take? Can we put something larger in, air conditioning, a larger portion of the school, classrooms? So it's a natural progression of the job. So right now, Bergerelli has started on the work. They're coming out for a site visit, and we plan to have a report back to them with a recommendation of which direction we should take in our air conditioning, whether or not we maybe just replace the cooling tower chiller, or maybe do something a little bit larger, add a larger size chiller. We should have that recommendation early enough in November that we'll be able to report it to the November operations committee for take a recommendation to the board in December.
Okay.
And this is just the first process. We would then take that recommendation back to Bergerelli, who would draft up bid documents for a construction project that we hope to bid February for summer construction.
Okay. Good. And it seems as though this type of work is necessary work to flesh out the 5-year plan. I mean, you can't really decide on things unless you have this kind of information in detail. And so this is a process that is the beginning of looking forward and ultimately getting to the point where at least major spaces in elementary schools are air conditioned, and with an eye for ultimately everything air conditioned.
That's correct. And we know, looking back at the drawings, the original drawings for the building, the original bid documents, that there are several alternates put out. And chiller that's in there now is the base bid chiller. So we know there is some capacity without going in and looking at the exact pipe sizes that were installed. How much chiller water can we get through the building? Can we pick up all the spaces or half the building, 3/4, 100%? We don't know until we can get in and look at the school.
Very good. Any other comment or question on this particular item? I don't know where this all fits together, so I'm just going to throw it out there. One thing that I don't see in these proposals is anything about Fort Washington window project. And the reason I bring that up is because as we start to look forward to upgrading electrical, of course, but then ultimately upgrading HVAC in the schools, and particularly in Fort Washington, at some point it's really necessary that we have a good building envelope. And I don't know with 100% clarity which is the best way to go first. What we've done at Fort Washington, or at Thomas Fitzwater and at Jarretttown, is we did windows to get a good building envelope, so that at some point in the future, as we go toward having the ability to upgrade in our HVAC to air conditioning, that part's taken care of. If we're looking at Fort Washington as, electrical system and potentially air conditioning large spaces, and we don't have the windows done, are we wasting energy and our efforts at that point? And are we out of sequence? That's, I guess, what I'm asking.
Well, I'd just add slightly to that question. At Fort Washington, I understand the curtain wall issue, especially in the classroom spaces, but if we're talking about large spaces, is there an opportunity to do some of the building, if not all of the building, with regard to building envelope?
Yes. Getting back to the windows, we have it listed on the 5-year plan as a summer 2019 project.
Right.
In order to do any air conditioning in Fort Washington, it's going to need an electrical upgrade. It's the last building, with last elementary with the original electric service. Capacity is not there. So that would have to occur before we do any air conditioning systems.
Absolutely.
If we were looking at air conditioning in 2021 with large spaces, and only air conditioning that we can install for large spaces, such as cafeterias, gymnasiums, we would do that district-wide to get a better price on the contract. We don't want to piecemeal this and end up with smaller projects. We lose that efficiency of the scale of the project. So in order to get Fort Washington up to speed with the other schools, one, the windows, yes, we do need windows. We do have efficiency loss. They are in good condition. So that's why that was in 2019. But moving numbers around, we wouldn't be able to move air conditioning up to 2021 unless we had electric service completed at Fort Washington.
So we're looking at electrical, windows, and then air conditioning.
Correct. And there was, originally I had electric in the 2020 category, summer 2020. I didn't think there was any chance to move that up just because of design. That is the next proposal on the list. Is we were talking to Schneider Hoffman, who just completed a very successful upgrade at Thomas Fitzwater. We're very happy with the way that turned out with the contractor. And talking with them, they believe this is possible to have this designed and bid this summer, bid or late winter, to have it installed early summer, so we can move around with some of our other projects.
All right. I apologize for interjecting in there, but I just needed some context before we moved on.
The windows at Fort Washington would more, that's everything, that's the classrooms. The larger spaces, the windows would not have as much impact.
All right. But, at some point, we need to at least have that parity with the rest of the schools. All the rest of the windows are done, and that one's not, and it's glaring.
And there's too much design work to try to do anything this summer.
For the windows.
For the windows,
right,
yes.
Right.
If we want to do that in 2018 summer, we should have been working on this all the summer. What we'll do in the spring is really start working with an architect to come up with what we need to do. in order to bid windows for installation in 2019.
Okay, all right, got it. Thank you. All right, let's go to the next item, which is engineering proposal to discuss plans for electrical service upgrade at Fort Washington Elementary.
Yes, Schneider Hoffman has done work for us many times in the past. We just finished the Thomas Fitzwater. They are proposing to design and bid electric service for us, provide their management, construction management as they do with our schools for $28,500. They're also looking at up to $975 in reimbursable expenses as part of that agreement.
Okay. All right. They were very satisfied with the project from Thomas Fitz. And so, yeah, I think it's a good idea to keep with them. Anyone else have any questions or comments on this particular item?
No,
The only thing, this would, if we move this up, this would adjust it, so we need to take a look, do we need to move anything else around with our 5-year plan? I know we have a doors scheduled next year. I guess that'll be a financial discussion. Do we keep those projects? Do we need to shift those around as well?
Okay.
This project, we're looking at the $350,000 range for the electric service.
Okay. Will there be any need to provide space for any of the new equipment as we had done with Thomas Fitzwater, or is it pretty much a quick change?
We would have to provide space. We would go with an outdoor transformer.
Okay.
There's several places. That's part of what they're starting to look at with the design. They did a field visit, the preliminary field visit the other day, just to take a look. There is opportunity in the corner of the parking lot, potentially up front. There's an existing transformer underground in front of the school. But they'll need to take a look at calculate their distances, whether or not the wire will be able to handle any losses for higher capacities going through.
Right, and that's part of the
Our
project is
yes.
figuring out all the
The one thing we would not have to build, we did the generator already, so Thomas Fitzwater this year included the generator, so there would not have to be an enclosure for the generator. Fort Washington already had the courtyard that we're able to put the generator in without the type of enclosure needed at Thomas Fitzwater, because that is an active play area, also the student drop-off.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right, any other comment, question?
In terms of moving things around, is that a finance committee discussion, or is that right now, or is that in the future when we're waiting for a recommendation from you? How do you want to handle that?
We roughly had $300,000 to $400,000 of door replacement that we're looking at.
And to be clear, let me just make sure that was basically a security-related lockdown situation change. It wasn't ADA or...
It was, we're really not looking at ADA on that. It was, the doors are getting old. The lock sets on the doors are not available anymore, so when the lock set fails, you have to modify the door. Notice the cost of replacing the door to get the new lock sets on. Most of our elementary school doors are still, they're almost all glass. Yeah. It wouldn't take much for somebody to get through one of those doors. The type of doors that we were looking at are similar to the high school, where there will be a solid slab with an hour. We're usually going with a 7 by 22 inch window, slide window down the side of the door. It would also be all the hardware on the doors, and it would bring our keying system up. So you have better control with master keys over the classrooms. Right now, it's Fort Washington's not as bad with a master key, but there's other buildings where you need a very large key ring just to try to figure out which classrooms we need to. So that would help us on the keying system. And those doors are available under state contract, so we do not need to go through the bidding process. We have a vendor we work closely with that does have the state contract for the doors, so it would just be a matter of them coming out, taking measurements of each door and putting the order in for us.
So in terms of whether we move the timing on that, how and when will that discussion?
Well, from my perspective, I don't know how much we're estimating the cost would be for Fort Washington Electric.
At Fort Washington, it would be $300,000, $350,000. The doors would be slightly more than that, and that's going off a rough estimate. The state contract, I did a project several years ago with off the state doors, where we did the installation, but we wouldn't be looking at doing the installation ourselves. And the numbers were significantly lower doing the installation ourselves, which I wouldn't want to attempt that. And we need a significantly larger staff for a project like that, so we better handle by so the state contract.
I would prefer, of course, to try to stay with their $1 million, but let's talk about the summer of 2018. In total, we're talking about the chiller, perhaps, and Maple Glen.
Which we don't have a final design or number on, so that could raise that.
All right, okay.
We're in a bit of state of flux in an attempt to try to move things up regarding the air conditioning, and we want to be flexible. So, I mean, I would like to see some prices before we firmly committed to whether we're going to work on it in 2018 or 2019.
Yeah, completely on board.
Okay. I hope everybody feels that's reasonable.
All right, and then last item, I believe we already talked about, was the proposal for the air conditioning of the spaces at Fort Washington, Jarretttown, and Thomas Fitzwater.
Yes, it would be a $16,000 study, and that's if we did all the buildings. It would be a $21,000 study if you picked individual buildings over the time. So you're getting the economy of scales for doing all the buildings at one time. $16,000. And what they're going to do is they're going to look at each building, the areas that can be air conditioned, and they're going to take into account, which is a little different way to look at things, is knowing going forward that we're going to have air conditioning, ventilation systems, do renovations to the buildings in the future. We want to put a system in that is going to be ripped out in a few years. We want something that's going to be sustainable, which I think is very possible because a lot of these larger spaces are used for community use as well. And so if it is a separate system in the classrooms, I don't want to be running classrooms or a large chiller for classrooms during community time, such as a weekend or nighttime when there's really the classrooms. So this is going to look at those opportunities. And we're really only going to look at something that is going to fit with any renovations in the future.
Okay. All right, good. So we'll be moving that forward for legislative meeting. And that's the end of the facilities recommendations. There are no items on the transportation recommendations. So that brings us to community input. If anyone would like to address the committee, please step forward, front and center, state your name, section of the township in which you live, 4-minute rules in effect.
Here, that's good.
Very well.
I just had a couple questions. I just want a clarification. So the AC that we're talking about in the elementary schools is just for large spaces, not for like classrooms, right? Just for like gym, cafeteria, okay. That's a little, I mean, that's great, but it's a little concerning just because Fort Washington, I don't know about the other schools so well, but Fort Washington, all those classrooms on the courtyard and the playground, they just bake. I mean, it's like 90-something degrees in those classrooms in the summer. It's like they've got the black roof above them and the black top below them, so you can't even really necessarily open windows in those rooms because you've got recess happening. And there's, there's first graders and second graders and third graders particularly. The lower levels are a little bit better. But so I just think that's a little bit, if we're going to go through the process, I think we should at least see how much more it would be to help some of those wings out. So that's one thing.
State her name.
Oh, sorry, Jen was
Yeah.
in Fort Washington.
Thank you.
For the record. And then I just want to also get clarification because I came in at the end. The space for the planetarium is there. The square footage is there, but that doesn't include, for instance, the dome, the projector, like making a planetarium, right? In the 70 million, it's literally like I could say we have the space here for a planetarium, but we're not.
I'll answer that.
Yeah, I just want the clarification for it. Like that includes, the whole shebang. What was my other question? The Fort Washington windows, I'm happy to hear you finally talking about it. All of the back windows in the lower level have foam core and are duct taped. In the elementary school level, they're duct taped, closed. My daughter's second grade teacher last year was stuffing coats and hats into holes and crevices where the cold air is blowing out. I mean, it really is quite something. So I'm hopeful that it'll actually stay on the list. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, it's Stan Robinson, Amler. Yeah. this outbuilding. I get it, Mr. Lester, that you need, space for materials, and I remember when this came up in the spring, $75,000 for a new roof. I thought that was a little too much. I went out to the building and I saw structural issues, then came back to the board. I said, these issues, I thought it was like the building wasn't worth saving, and you had you approved funding a analysis of the building. I think it was for $5,000, and then now it's 100. Now we're up to $115,000 because I said, you want to save this building, you want to put a new roof on it. Had no floor. The floor was sloped. It was exposed to the elements. I really think that spending $115,000 for a building that could be half rotted. I don't know. They might repair the lineals and all of the framing and the rafters, and yet 5 years down the road it may need more repairs. Again, with it being exposed, having 3 sides only enclosed and 1 side open, I really think this is like way too much money to spend on a building that is exposed to the elements, and you're still limited on the amount of items that you can put in there. I think you should get a price on, and I think we discussed this, that building brand new, something that could have a loft that you could perhaps double the capacity of storing that, just to see how much it is. I mean, gosh, it may cost $100,000 to build brand new. I know that your issues were, well, if we're building brand new, you're going to have to go through land development. But maybe there was a formula out there that, okay, if a percentage of the building needs to be could be improved, and therefore wouldn't be redevelopment. Maybe if you raised a roof or something like that, that you're going to add more additional space, which would make spending $115,000 more, the threshold would be more worth it, in terms of the square footage. Because I think when I measured, I think it was, is it 100 by 60, the building? Yeah. So, for 6,000 square feet to spend $115,000, I think that's a lot of money. And I don't know if any other board members read the report. I think we need to look at that report better, and again, see if there's, issues that could come up 5, 6 years from now, 10 years from now. Who knows? But again, what kind of roofing material? Is it going to be cedar shake? Is it asphalt? Did they say that? What it was?
The asphalt sheet. Asphalt sheet.
Asphalt, yeah, 30 years, 20 years. Again, and then not only that, there was no driveway to this outbuilding. So if it was, snow, or if it was soaking, the soil was drenched, what kind of vehicles you're going to be using it? I mean, because you would sink into the mud, So that was just my thought. I think you should delay this, in my opinion, and make this a budgetary item. Since it's $115,000, I think that is not like an item that should be just, okay, let's just approve it. I think it needs to be discussed. But I don't know if that's your process, but I know that in the township, that if there was something that big, we would discuss that and approve it as a budget item. So, that's all.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Veronica Lambert from Washington, and I just have one question relating to the architects that will be chosen. I can go back a little bit, and if I understood correctly, there's an internal team currently that's going to review those architects and present them to the public. And so my question is, what criteria? I think this is good, make a point that there will be some criteria, but I don't know if there's some, like in writing, is there a formula, or what are you exactly looking at? What is the team looking at? What process will be using to find these architects? Because this is going to be presented, I guess, in November 14th, if I'm correct, this list.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll close community input and try to address some of these questions. Okay, deal with the air conditioning, the workspaces, and potentially classrooms.
Can I ask a question? The Vervarelli, I'm going to mispronounce that name. The V company. The feasibility study, is that for more than just the large spaces? No, it's
Just the large spaces.
Okay. So, do we have any idea about what they would charge if we wanted to look at beyond the large space, the feasibility study?
No, we didn't go into that with them. We talked with numbers. Doing a full air conditioning would really be renovating the rooms in their entirety because we'd be pulling the ceilings down, and that would just start triggering other. So if we're going to pull the ceiling out for HVAC, we're going to be required to upgrade the sprinkler systems in the building, and it'd just be a compounding project. So at that time, we were looking at classrooms. Would have to really be a major building renovation.
But that said, there are other passive solutions that we've discussed in the past, like the asphalt around the exterior and window films or awnings or trees or whatever, white roofs, etc. That is something we could pursue separately, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe is that something we will pursue separately? I know it's not in the current plan, but
We just haven't addressed that.
Okay, there was a question about the planetarium as far as the square footage is in there.
Yeah, so it's
not the equipment.
Well, so, right, the plan, everything that we have right now is just square footage. And it's an average dollar per square foot for typical buildings in this area. Ruth could have given us more detail about exactly where the number comes from, but it includes spaces that are more expensive per square foot for things like, I'm imagining things like auditoriums and things like that, and things that are less expensive per square foot, like, probably a math classroom or something, I'm guessing. And so it's an average number. So the specifics of the cost of things like a dome and projector and the computer systems and specialized lighting and all the things that are in a planetarium aren't there because there's no specifics for anything in there. But in theory, that average number should incorporate roughly that. Like in terms of square footage, you're talking somewhere between 700 and 1,200 square feet in a 200,000 per square foot project. So if it's a little bit more expensive to facilitate, to put all the stuff in a room like a planetarium, it's not going to dramatically change average cost per square foot. So, but again, it's just an estimate of average cost per square foot. So you're right, the specifics aren't in there, but probably that doesn't significantly change the dollar figure. It's the space that drives the dollar figure.
I know that it hasn't been that many years ago that we upgraded the existing planetarium.
10 years.
10 years.
10 years?
10.
Yes, it has been.
But I'm just wondering if what we have in the existing would be something that could moved over to a new planetarium, even if it were larger.
The only thing that could realistically move to a new planetarium is the original projector.
Right. The dome itself cannot.
The dome itself, well, first of all, there's a question of if we did build a new planetarium, how big would it be? Even if it were the same size, you're going to do too much damage to the dome, taking it down to actually put it back up. So you'd be buying a new dome if you built a new planetarium. The projector is ancient anyway, it needs to be replaced. While you could potentially move it over, I don't think you would. It's not just the projector, I should say, it's a whole projector system. It's the projector and the computer and all the software and all the things that go with it. The lighting is, part of the room, that's not going to move over. Rugs, seating, etc. All that's going to get replaced.
Yeah, and without making promises, we have been having, some of us on the board and the committee, and also the foundation has been working with Kim Small on, pursuing donors for specific items such as the projector.
Okay.
So those talks are.
Right. So that's a whole.
That's a whole other, and we're working closely with Kim on that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. See what you started? Okay. Appreciate, Stan, your thoughts on the outbuildings. It does temper the discussion to some degree, and there's things we'll have to consider as we're trying to decide whether or not to approve project. And then it's regarding the selection criteria for architects. Anyone have any real sense on what that will look like?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I'm not sure if you were here yet, Veronica, but we haven't gotten quite there yet. But the loose discussions we've been having so far is, like I said before, I think we're looking at big players who we know could do any of the options that we're talking about. And there just don't seem to be that many of them. But we haven't like written down a formal set of criteria or really, gotten far enough to actually identify a list yet. The goal is to get there by the legislative meeting.
And if it's like the high school project, there's a whole bunch of intangibles you could never even think of in advance. You know it when you see it. And some of it is that. The temperament of the architects, how well do they take suggestions and move with them, their interest in the project. If there's a major omission in some of the things that they're thinking of designing, all that comes into play, and basically you know it when you see it. But of course there are minimum standards of criteria as far as work they've done in the past, and the size of the firm, and their contacts with all the subs and all of that are also important. So all that'll go into play. But as we get a little further on, that'll be more laid down. Okay, is there anything else that we need to discuss? I think we've covered the items that were brought forward. And looking at that, I would just mention that our next Operations Committee meeting will be on Thursday, November the 16th at 6 p.m. I imagine by then we should be in the Cardinal Room.
We'll be back in the
I
Cardinal Room.
hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah, for your sake. Okay, and anything else that we need to cover? We good? All right, thank you very much. We're adjourned. And